What is up, YouTube? I'm Taylor and I hate mosquitoes. Welcome back to the channel. Today, this is long overdue. I'm just going to say that. But today we've got the majority of the parts to get the 1966 Triumph Mountain Cub back up on our wheels, make it into a rolling chassis again. So that's what we're going to do. I'll get into why this took so long to get out to you. Alright, so before we get started, I'll go ahead and explain everything that's been going on in my whirlwind of a life. But had basically an issue where the fork stanchions, I ordered a pair from a company in England and they only shipped me one of two. So that was the main reason why this took so long. And then I got laid off from my 9-to-5 temporarily. So they told me, you'll have a job in 3 weeks, come back then. And being presented with that, I proceeded to book a 2-week trip to Europe. So the fork stanchion came in while I was gone. The fork springs came in while I was gone. So everything's here for the front end. I was able to assemble one of the fork stanchions with the rest of the fork components minus the fork spring. Actually get that prepped and ready to make this a little bit easier when I got back. Additionally, while I was in England, I picked up another set of Webco handlebars. It's the same set of handlebars that I've got on either of my BSAs. Big fan of the bars that the guys over at Ace Classics of London produce. So we're going to go ahead and toss those on as well. But yeah, without further ado, let's jump into it. The first thing that we're going to do here is we are going to clean up the bearing races on the steering column. So this one's a little bit rough. We're just going to clean it up with some like wire pad, something like Scotch-Brite, that sort of thing. Or not Scotch-Brite, but this stuff. If I can find some, yeah. We're just going to take some steel wool, clean that up. So I'll clean that up and then make sure it's clean, no dust, that sort of thing there. Same thing with that. That looks like it's just old grease. So go ahead and get that cleaned up, and then I'll show you guys how I install the steering head, our steering column bearings. And as you can see, just with a little bit of steel wool, and then I use brake cleaner or carb cleaner just as a general all-purpose. Was able to get that cleaned up, both of those surfaces. So we are ready for the next step, which is attaching, basically sandwiching the triple tree on the headstock. Okay, now before you go ahead and sandwich these around the headstock up there, you're going to go ahead and want to clean up any of these surfaces as well. Just make sure, just like you did the races on the steering neck, you're going to do the same thing here for the triple trees. So clean up the bearing race here, and then also clean up anywhere where the fork tube is actually going to slide in. Additionally, clean up this piece a little bit. That's your steering nut. That will go in there and get sandwiched. Clean that up a little bit. Clean this up. And then, because I am reusing this, one thing I want to mention is you can clean up the threads on the inside with a tap. However, this is Whitworth, and I do not have a Whitworth tap. So I'm going to go ahead and just run a wire brush through this. Just clean it up best I can, and then I'm going to use anti-seize. That way I don't have any issues taking it apart in the future. Alright, I typically just use super white lithium grease, multi-purpose. You can use other types of grease. But the biggest piece of advice for doing this, where you're using just loose ball bearings, get one of these magnetic trays. You can get them at any auto parts store, Harbor Freight. I've gotten a couple for free at Harbor Freight when I bought other stuff. But super useful because you don't lose the ball bearings. as they have a tendency to roll. Now, what you're going to want to do now is just get some grease, and you can apply this pretty liberally. In fact, I like applying it liberally, and you'll see why. And we're going to start with the bottom triple tree first. Make sure you have plenty of rags on hand, because this is where it gets messy. Now, this takes 15 ball bearings per race. So what you're going to do, I hope that can be seen on camera, you're just going to take each ball bearing and then just work your way around. In this case, all 15. That grease being packed on there thick like that helps the bearings to stick and not roll off. Okay, and just like that. Okay, so now that that's done, the first thing I would recommend doing is preparing the top race. Now that the bottom one's finished, we're going to go ahead and prepare the top as well. That way, all we got to do is shove the bottom half of the triple tree up through the steering neck, and then we can grab it. When you're doing the top one, you want to be extra careful not to drop the ball bearing down in here and then therefore on the inside of that race. That would not be good. Now I am going to grab a wrench that fits this, that way I can tighten that down all in one go. I did not clean up the other half of the top race, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. We'll resume in a second. Now before we slide that up there, we're going to go ahead and lube up and just grease both the top and the bottom. Because again, this is in lieu of like a sealed steering bearing. So I'm going to spread that grease around like so. Okay, so there's the top one. I'm just going to set that off to the side for now. And then we'll do the bottom, just like so. Don't worry too much about getting extra grease in here. The whole purpose of this is just to make sure that those bearings have plenty of lubrication. And then any of the excess can be wiped away before the next step. Set your grease to the side. And then you've got this, it's just a dust shield. You'll take your 1/2 Whitworth and just start tightening that up. Then you're going to take your triple tree, the top of it, and sandwich it down in there, but I'm going to take a piece of Scotch-Brite and just clean up this edge a little bit. That way it's easier to slide down onto that. And then after you get that all cleaned up around that edge, you're just going to use a mallet to get that down a little bit easier, because that is a pressure fit. So then we're on to the next step, which will be the rear wheel. Okay, I'm sure I went over it before, but it's important to label your parts when you take them off. That way you know what goes with what. So here we have the lower rear shock mounts. We're going to go ahead and get the wheel in first before attaching the shocks, because that I think will be easiest. We have our new rear wheel. The old one was completely roached, so had to be done. Either that or completely relace up a new wheel, which I don't know about you, but I don't necessarily like lacing rims. And if you have a second set of hands, makes this a little bit easier. But we're going to get it done. So we roughly know where that goes. That needs, let's see. And then never be afraid to just look at a parts diagram either. Especially for me, like this kind of goes together like a Lego set, but you want to make sure that you're getting stuff in the right order. That's it. So I like to show my mistakes, and this is one of those where I just got ahead of myself, and it's nothing major. The big thing is I was wrestling with the speedometer drive over here. The bearing wasn't fully seated into the wheel hub. Therefore, the speedometer drive couldn't fully seat onto the hub as well. And therefore, I was having issues with actually sliding the axle into these little cutouts on the swing arm. Now, I got that in there, and then hand tightened the brake stay bolt. Now I went to go install the shocks, and normally, right, the shocks go on like so, just like that, and then they'll bolt up here. However, on the Mountain Cub, it's not like that. That's how it is on the BSA. How it is on the Mountain Cub is you have these spacer brackets. Essentially, that bolt goes through there. It all gets mounted up like so. So you have to do that before you get the actual wheel assembly into the swing arm. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and we'll resume as soon as I've got those brackets attached up here with the bottom parts of the shocks mounted. Okay, so I finally got it all put back together. This is the bolt that I was talking about. As you can see down there, there's barely enough clearance to get a wrench in. And that's only on the left side. The right side, you could slide completely out if you wanted to. Just go through the spokes. But I'm going to go ahead and get all of this buttoned up. Get these put up into the shock mounts up top. Get everything tightened up, and then we will start on the front end assembly. But before we start on the front end assembly, I just wanted to show you guys how this all assembles together. So that goes on there like so, and then we've got nuts down here for the bottom mount. If you remember from I think the first video, possibly the second video of this series, the rear shock mount, the bolt was rusted to the bushing inside of the rubber bushing in the shock. So basically, I had to cut this off just to be able to pull the shocks initially on the original rear subframe. I was able to save those bolts. It was a mess, but got those out, got them cleaned up and covered in anti-seize. So now hopefully that will not be an issue in the future. That being said, the rear wheel is completely mounted. The rear shocks are completely mounted. Now let's go ahead and get started on getting the fork tubes mounted. Now, as I said in the beginning of the video, I went ahead and assembled one of the two fork tubes while I was waiting on the other fork stanchion to come in the mail. That was a whole mess, but got that all squared away. It's in that brown box down there on that chair. So I'm going to go ahead and set this one to the side and then do a walkthrough with all these components to show you how it's assembled and basically do a how to assemble the fork tubes for a 1966-1967 Triumph Mountain Cub. Okay, so just a basic anatomy of this, how this is all assembled, and I'll go ahead and drop a picture too, just so you guys can see that. I'll probably put that off to the side here, just so that you guys can see how this goes together, but then also see the parts at the same time. I think that would be helpful. It was helpful for me when I assembled the first one. So, basic anatomy, you've got your fork stanchion. It's a hollow tube. It's kind of cambered on the end. That way it can slide into the top of the triple tree. Down further, you have two bronze bushing pieces. This part is stepped, just like this. It's stepped, so that bronze piece slides on here. And then you've got your, I believe this is another bushing or spacer. I'm spacing the name of it, but off the top of my head right now, again, that will be over here to the right. You can see that. But then that goes on after that. And that little lip that you see right here, that actually lines up with the top of the fork lower. So once you get those attached to the fork stanchion, you slide it through this, and this is the old one, and as you can see, it is roached. Basically, there's an oil seal in there and some washers. You slide that whole assembly down through the oil seal into the fork lower, and then you tighten it. It's threaded. That one's pretty rough, but you get the idea. Threaded, and it threads onto here, and then you fill it with oil, put the spring in over the top, mount the fork gator using these little clips, and then you are pretty much good to go. So let's go ahead and I'll show you how that goes with each step. Something I didn't mention in the last clip was this part right here. So this threads into the bottom of the fork stanchion itself. Again, once you get these on, that threads on like so, just like that. You want the conical part, the female conical part, facing down. So what that does is essentially adds a little bit of a cushion with the oil. When you get that in there, you know, friction's good. A little bit of friction's good, but lubrication's good too. Little adult humor there. But that being said, that is really hard to get back in here. So I'm going to tell you a little trick. The first thing you want to do is get this little drain screw, put it back in this hole. Once you get that in, that pin, the bottom of that drain screw actually lines up with this right here. So I found that the easiest way to do this is get this part hooked on to that, and then essentially you're going to shove an extension and a socket, a deep well socket and an extension down the fork tube from the other side, you know, just to hold that steady while you thread this bolt into that. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I'll kind of show you how I'm doing it as I go through it. It's a bit of a pain, but you'll be able to get it. So I don't know how long I can keep this focused, but you see the pin down in there. You're going to essentially keep that in mind again for that little indent. Now, my recommendation is you flip this upside down like so, and then you take your socket on an extension. This is an 11/16, which I found holds that pretty damn good. And then you're going to, this takes a little bit of finesse, but what I've found works best is then just take this, your fork tube, and you're just going to lower it over that. Now, that gets you somewhat close. For the sake of this, we're just going to use the top of the fork cap. So again, you're going to line that up. I'm going to try to do this one-handed without messing that up. So now, if you look down in here, you see the, man, this is so hard to do one-handed. You see the indent right there, barely. I got it lit up. You can kind of see it. And then you're going to take a pick. In my case, I've got just this tiny punch. And I'm going to get down into the threaded section of that. And then I'm going to roll it all at once if I can. So this is where I'm going to have to set the camera down, but that's holding that right where it needs to be. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to grab that section and then the whole fork lower and flip it. So that way that falls into place. So as you can see, we got that piece down in there. Now, this is the next hard part. So I was able to get it started. However, because I don't have the correct size Whitworth that will actually fit that hole in the bottom of that, because that bolt is recessed. So my recommendation here, if you also have a Triumph Mountain Cub or Triumph Cub, this should work as long as it's got the heavyweight forks. But use an 8mm, very thin wall socket. I've got a nice set given to me by a friend that came with this little ratcheting driver. Highly, highly recommend that because that'll actually work. So now you're going to do the opposite. Now that you've got the thread started, you're going to drop this down here, and that's going to hold that in place. Now you can then basically flip that and then use the driver bit. Okay, so once you have your fork stanchion assembled, you've got both of the bronze bushings and the spacer piece, and then you've got the cap on the bottom. And I just put that on there with the same tool that you use to basically to tighten a grinder wheel on a grinder. That sort of thing to, you know, the tool with 2 pins, essentially. But, and then you have your fork lower all good to go with the drain plug and that bolt down there with the cone inside the bottom. Then you want to basically just test fit that this is going to slide all the way up. So I had some issues there. It was not wanting to slide all the way up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clean up the inside surface of this fork lower a little bit. And then once that's good, then we'll, because basically there's a little bit of oxidation in there. We're going to clean that up and then spray it out with brake cleaner. Let that air dry, and then we'll retest fit again. And then once that's good, you've got 2 washers here. The smaller one of the 2 will go on here below the oil seal, and then the big one will go on top of the oil seal. So there's your fresh oil seal and oil seal holder, and then that will go down after that. Okay, now that you've got your top hat piece seated up against the fork lower, again, you're going to take your smaller washer and grab your fork tube, and then you're just going to slide that down like so. Okay, so now that that's good, now you're going to take your oil seal holder, get that on there, and I'll show you how to thread that on there without scuffing up that nice polished metal. Okay, so now that we've got the oil seal on there, or the small washer and then the oil seal, you can see I've got this bottomed all the way out. It's starting to turn. You want to get this started by hand. And then it's going to get to a point where you cannot turn it by hand. See, it's not moving. So what you're going to do is you're going to take a rag and you're going to wrap it tightly around that. I'll show you what I'm talking about when I'm done. And then you're going to take, I like to call this a heavy duty oil filter wrench. It's a chain on a vice grip. You can still buy these, I'm pretty sure. This is one of the best tools that I have in my shop. I use it for a lot of things. For magnetos, holding that still on the old 2-strokes. I don't know, you name it. You find uses for it. Pick one of these up. You won't regret it. I'm going to go ahead and get that all set up, and then when I come back, I'll have that tightened down. I'll show you guys how I'm doing it. Okay, so now that I've got that all hooked up, I'm going to cinch this down. Okay, so now that I've got that rag on, I've got the oil filter wrench on. This is really hard too because I'm I'm right-handed. So I'm holding the phone in my right hand and I'm trying to show you guys how to do this with my left hand. But pay attention to the threads too. I'm going to go ahead and check the other side. But you want them to be about the same. So there's, 5 threads there? 6 threads showing. So that's what we're going to do on this one. Which, if I was a betting man, is somewhere right in here. So we got a little bit to go. So I'm going to go ahead and get that all squared away, and then I'll resume when we're ready for the springs. Some of you might have the same issue because I just scuffed it up, even though I wasn't trying to, but I was able to get the other one the same without scuffing it. So you might have mixed results. I'm not going for a show bike. I'm going for a bike that's patinaed and that I can ride. So yeah, it sucks. It's scratched. I'm not too worried about it. So we're going to continue on. Okay, so big washer is now down there around the top of the oil seal. Then you're going to take SAE 30, not 10W30, SAE 30. Make sure it's the correct one. You don't want a detergent oil, so that's non-detergent. So you want that stuff in your fork tube. You want 200 cc's of it, or 200 milliliters. Cc's and milliliter is the same thing. For whatever reason, the old British stuff, just the old stuff in general, they use cc. Cc and millimeter is the same. So you want 200 cc's, 200 milliliters in the fork tube. You can just pour it straight down the top, and then you're going to kind of work it. I'm sure I'm going to catch hell for that one in the comments, but you get the idea. Then once it's filled with the 200 cc's of oil, then you just want to work that up and down. Obviously, I can't do it one-handed, but cue the jokes. But yeah, just work that up and down, make sure it's lubricated, that it's working smoothly, and then you can continue on to adding the fork spring, the external fork spring, just sliding that right down the shaft. Okay, so we're nearing the end of the fork tube assembly. Now that we've got all the washers in, the oil seal in, all the bushing, the spacer, the cone in the bottom, fork gator is attached on the bottom. Now all we have to do is clean up the cap, or the top of the oil seal, or top of the fork gator, excuse me. So that's what the fork gator attaches to. That will go right there. And then this part slides into the triple tree. So I'm going to get that cleaned up best I can, and then that will go on. I'll put the fork spring in the other one, and then we'll go ahead and mount the forks to the bike frame. Okay, so now that we've got the whole back half of the chassis ready, now we're going to go ahead and insert the fork tubes into the triple tree. And the reason why that we do it in this order is because essentially the back wheel will weigh down that end because there's some heft here with these front forks. So until we get that on, then we can do this. Obviously it's not tied down. No good way to tie this down until we get the handlebars on. So we are going to go ahead and start this process. Now you'll remove your fork cap or fork tube cap, and then you're just going to slowly work this up. And it's going to be a bear. So I'm going to go ahead and try to help open up these clamps a little bit with a flathead screwdriver. And then obviously once you get it close, then at that point, then you can start threading the fork nut cap on, or fork cap nut on, through the top of the triple tree. But until you get it seated, it's going to be a little bit of a bear. And I'm pretty sure, could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure they make pulling tools that you thread in, and then you can pull it all the way up, which is something I should probably invest in one of these days, to be honest. We still have a little ways before we can start threading it, but you get the idea. And then so I'm going to go ahead and keep working at this, but then once you get that in there and start threading that, get that threaded all the way, and then take your clamp bolt, slide it through, and then for the Mountain Cub in particular with these heavyweight forks, then you've got your steering stop as well. That's basically the nut on the back half of the triple tree clamp bolt. All right, everybody, it got entirely too late last night, and the fork tubes, the installation of the fork tubes just did not go according to plan. We had already put on the top of the triple tree, which figured out last night is not the easiest way to do it. The easiest way to assemble the front forks, the front end, go ahead and remove the triple tree top and then get that completely out of the way. And then what you're going to want to do is stand over the steering neck and then just pull up on the fork stanchion. Pull that up as far as you can. Get the fork tube cap nut tightened down, and then you want to check, make sure that these aren't loose. You want a little bit of tension on those springs. That way it doesn't rattle around on you at full extension like it is now. That being said, then once you've got that done, then you can go ahead and tighten the lower triple tree clamp bolts, and then you can go from there. So finished up last night with that, and I was like, all right, I'm done. So we have to put on the front fender and the front wheel today. That is the plan. So we're going to start with the front fender. I'm going to clean up these bolts a little, just real quick, and then we will finish up bolting up the fender. Fender's pretty easy. I'll show you guys what I'm looking at here once I get those cleaned up. Okay, so for the fender, the only two things, you've got these little like weirdly shaped brackets. It's just got a slot, and that lines up with a slot on either side of the, you can kind of tell it from the back side here, but it just lines up with that on the fork lower, and then just put that bolt there, and then you've got the lower fork stay or fender stay bolts. So I'm going to go ahead and get those attached, and then we'll move on to the front wheel. Now that the front fender is all attached properly, and that's looking good, the rest of the bike's all ready. Now we are ready for the front wheel. So if I can get it around the tire, that is. Okay, so I was able to get the front wheel inside the fork tubes and inside the fender, of course, but the reason why I was having trouble with that is whoever had this before replaced this bolt with a longer bolt, which not a problem so long as the wheel's already on the bike. It presents a little bit of a challenge with actually pushing the tire in, or the wheel in. So you can kind of see there where it dragged, but did have to deflate the tire just a hair, but was able to get it in. Now we're presented with the next challenge, which is getting the yoke for the axle actually put in there, and you'll see there's a little indent right here, and that lines up with the hole for the bolt. Now, that's not something that I realized initially. I was able to get it lined up on this side without dremeling, but I am going to have to create a new channel for the bolt to pass through on that little axle spacer piece. So I'm just going to do that on both sides. That way we've got enough clearance to get the yoke in. Okay, we're zooming, and just like that, we do have the front wheel on. The Dremel definitely did the trick. Just got this little bit here. All I did was just, you know, so. But yeah, definitely just make that channel on that piece right there. And that ought to do the trick if you're having a hard time fitting your front axle into the yoke on the bottom of the lower fork tubes. So, it is now on its wheels. I have some parts coming in from England that I bought. They're actually arriving today, the handlebars being one of them. So we'll go ahead and get those on as soon as they come in the mail. We do have the package from England. I was able to go and pick this out at the shop itself. Ace Classics of London. Thank you guys. Can't recommend these people enough. But let's go ahead and get that package open, and then we'll go ahead and get the handlebars on. That ought to finish up the chassis. Now, we'll talk about the handlebar hardware real quick. We've got U-bolts. Those obviously just go right in here around the handlebar. We've got the actual handlebar itself, the nuts and washers for the U-bolts. But then you also have these. These are called packing pieces, and they just basically wrap around the handlebar. That way it fits securely in there, and might even put them in there like that. So we'll figure out which orientation those go just based off of the parts diagram. Should be fairly simple on how to tighten that down and everything there. So I'm not going to explain it further, but you get the idea. I'll show what it looks like when it's all finished. Well, that pretty much does it for this video. I went ahead and set the tank on there just so I can see what it's looking like, and it's already looking fantastic in my opinion. I'm super excited how it's turning out. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you like this video, you like the content, please feel free to hit that like, comment, and subscribe button down below, and the bell as well. That way you're notified next time I post. I really appreciate you guys tuning in and following along. Thank you. Bye-bye.